White power!
White power!
White power!
White power!
So you think this is what a good Christian man does?
Yeah.
Klansman, do you accept the light?
Klansman, do you accept the light?
They shot the man and they hanged him and then used his body for target practice so as to teach black folk a lesson.
The air reeks of kerosene.
That's what we call it, Klan cologne.
We're at a KKK rally in the heart of Mississippi, a countryside still haunted by memories of lynchings and church bombings from decades ago. He witnessed a black man dragged through the streets,
This is where we're gonna need some help at.
where people have come to join the Grand Dragon Stephen Hopkins.
America is at turmoil, and we're lighting crosses to let people know that America is at turmoil right now.
But you're wearing the robes of traditional terrorists, of traditional haters.
That's our Christianity. I mean, that's just plain and simple.
Black people and white people are nowhere related. In my opinion, I think black people evolved from animals. And I believe that we need to be separated. Whites and blacks need to be separated. I don't agree with race mixing. Let them set up their own state where they belong and give them their own homeland.
And if your daughter, when she got older, came home and said, I want to go out with a black boy,
I'd disown her. Wouldn't have nothing else to do with her for the rest of my life.
Now a look at tonight's 2020, digging into a racially motivated cold case cracked after decades. A young black man was murdered in Georgia in the 80s, and it would take years for his loved ones to finally find justice. Deborah Roberts joins us now with much more. Deborah, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. It was a gruesome murder that rattled Griffin, Georgia when it happened. And worse for the family, no arrest. A small southern town with a history of racial bias, some feared they'd never get answers until new investigators took a closer look at this old case.
For decades, it was a mystery in this small Georgia town. Who killed Tim Coggins? The 23-year-old was found murdered in 1983. It would take his family 35 years to get answers.
And when he was brutally murdered, how did that affect the family? How did that affect you?
Well, for me, it was terrible. I mean, even to this day, I'm 53 years old now, and it still affects me to this day right now.
Tim's body was found with 7 stab wounds and the sign of a Confederate flag etched into his chest. Those close to him suspected his murder had everything to do with the color of his skin.
Imagine a chilling October day in 1983. In the remote town of Sunnyside, Georgia, a body is discovered near a power line. The body was that of Timothy Coggins, a young black man of just 23 years. The details of his death were not just grim, they were downright brutal.
This was Tim. This was the smooth guy, the guy that never bothered nobody, always helped somebody.
Some wondered if his death may have been related to a woman he was dating, a white woman.
It's not love. If you love somebody of your own race.
Timothy Coggins was a young black man back in 1983 who refused to follow societal norms.
Klansman, do you accept the light?
Yes, I do.
Klansman, do you accept the light?
I accept this light.
He was not following the rules of 1983, if you will. And if you were a Klan member or a racist, any of those things would infuriate you and anger you to the point where Timothy Coggins became a target.
And they told a tale of unimaginable cruelty. Timothy had been stabbed multiple times as if the act of murder itself wasn't enough. He had been tortured. His body was found chained and had been dragged behind a truck across a field. The wounds on his chest were in the shape of a cross, repeating on his back symbols that later were said to represent the Confederate flag.
A target that needed to be eliminated.
But there were no arrests, just rumors about Klansmen and police turning a blind eye. Then the case went cold.
You just feel that you're in a small, racist South Georgia town, and nobody really cares about the justice for your family and what have been done to your loved one.
A lot of hate in me. A lot of hate for nothing. I got a lot of built up in me, a lot of hurt.
Pastor Hartsfield knows all about hurt.
It hurts deeply, and I struggled for a long time not to hate those people that did that.
Good will overcome evil. Right will overcome wrong.
Did that haunt the family, not having those answers?
Absolutely. It haunted our family until July 26, 2016, when Sheriff Dix called and said, hey, I think we're going to reopen Tim's case.
After 35 years, this case was far from a slam dunk. We'll take you along on this investigation as they searched for answers.
Every time you have a story in the front page of the local newspaper about a Klan rally or something along those lines, the Klan or that particular group does get a member or two. On the other hand, 99.9% people who read about that are essentially inoculated against them. I think it's actually harming them more than it's helping them in the end.
No, and it ain't just me. It's just it's going to be another war in this United States of America.
Yes, sir. White power! White power! White power! White power!
But the sheer inhumanity didn't end there. The worst part is, they didn't kill him outright. The autopsy showed that Timothy, this young man who had his whole life ahead of him, bled out. His life ebbed away, discarded behind a pile of wood, left to die a slow and painful death. Before his death, Timothy had been defying societal norms. He was a black man who had been dating a white woman in a time and place where such relationships were frowned upon, to say the least. The connection between this, racism, and his killing was all too clear.
New at 4, investigators say they are close to solving a murder they now consider a hate crime. Someone killed a 23-year-old man 34 years ago. Now new clues have detectives hopeful they'll solve this cold case. Channel 2's Richard Elliott is live in Spalding County with the information that led deputies to reopen this investigation. Richard?
This was a horrible crime. In 1983, deputies found the body of Timothy Coggins here along Mintier Road, right over there by those power lines. 34 years later, investigators now think they are close, finally, to finding out who did it. It happened along this dusty stretch of Minter Road, not far from the town of Sunnyside. Deputies discovered the body of this man, 23-year-old Timothy Coggins. It was October 1983.
It was a horrible death. It was a torturous death.
34 years later, Spalding County Sheriff Darrell Dick says they got new information through the GBI, information from someone that he says shed new light on existing evidence and could lead them to several arrests. Because he feels they're close to solving the murder, the sheriff couldn't release many details of the homicide, except to say he does believe this was a hate crime.
But the people who did it, they know what it was. The people who committed the crime know how he was killed, and those are the people that we're coming after.
It has been 34 years, but Minter Road looks about the same. It's still a dirt road, and one neighbor who didn't want to go on camera said it did involve power lines just like this one. But again, it was 34 years ago. Not a lot of the neighbors are the same. The ones who live here now are shocked by this news.
I think it's horrible. It's sad that that would happen. It's interesting to know about the area. I hope they find who done it and justice is served. I really do.
So how did this stay quiet for 34 years? Well, the sheriff believes the suspects actually intimidated witnesses into silence for those 34 years. Coming up at 6, how some of those witnesses, they say, are finally coming forward. We're live in Spalding County. Richard Elliott, Channel 2 Action News.
Despite the initial investigations and the shock that reverberated through the community, the leads soon dried up. The case of Timothy Coggins, a young man who dared to live his life on his own terms, went cold. For nearly 35 long years, his murder remained unsolved, his killer, or killers, unpunished. But this was not just a murder, it was a message, a terrifying display of racism and hatred. It was a stark reminder that in some parts of the world, even in the late 20th century, the color of your skin could determine not just how you lived, but also how brutally and senselessly you might die. Timothy Coggins, a mere 23 years of age, lived a life true to himself, defying societal norms of 1983. A young man, full of vigor and vitality, he was known for his radiant smile and amiable nature. His life was an embodiment of resistance against the racial prejudices of the time. Timothy, a black man, dared to cross the invisible lines of racial segregation. He sold marijuana in predominantly white neighborhoods and chose to love without color boundaries. He was involved in a romantic relationship with a white woman, an act that was a taboo in those times. This defiance and refusal to conform to racial norms painted a target on his back, infuriating those blinded by prejudice and hatred. Timothy was a man who valued love over hate, unity over division, and freedom over subjugation. But his life, filled with potential, was abruptly ended, leaving his family and community in shock and despair. For 35 long, agonizing years, Timothy Coggins' murder remained unsolved, his family left in limbo. The brutal details of his demise were chilling reminders of a hate crime that seemed to have slipped through the cracks of the justice system. But the wheels of justice, though they may grind slowly, never truly stop turning.
Last hour, 2 men accused in a racially motivated murder appeared in court. Here's a new image. Prosecutors claim the two killed the victim because he socialized with a white woman. Channel 2 Sophia Choi live in Spalding County. Sophia, it was an emotional hearing.
In 2016, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, armed with a tenacity to seek justice and advances in forensic science, decided to reopen the cold case. The investigators dusted off the old files, delved into the gruesome details, and began to piece together a picture of that fateful night in 1983.
Justin, I saw the victim's family crying in court today as they heard the awful details of this case. Investigators say what these two men did.
The reopening of the case rekindled hope in the hearts of Timothy's family and the community at large. The investigators were determined to find answers, and they did.
Would be considered a hate crime today. Take a look. This is new video we got today of 59-year-old Franklin Gebhardt and 58-year-old William Moore Sr. at a bond hearing. The two are accused of killing 23-year-old Timothy Coggins 34 years ago. Investigators found Coggins' body on October 9th, 1983 in a grassy area near some power lines on Minter Road. Today we learned prosecutors now have witnesses who say the two actually dragged Coggins behind a truck and butchered him with a knife for racial reasons.
That the murder of Timothy Coggins was due to Coggins socializing with a white female, and that Coggins had been stabbed multiple times and drugged behind a truck by Franklin Gebhardt and William Moore Sr.
Now, the defense questioned why those witnesses waited so long to come forward and said the two accused men are so old and feeble they would not be a danger to the community and should get bond. But the judge disagreed, saying witnesses waited to come forward because these two men intimidated them by threatening violence. Now, we spoke with the victim's family after the hearing today. As I mentioned, they cried in court. They actually said this doesn't even seem real. It seems like a movie or something. We'll have their comments. I'm going through that right now for Channel 2 Action News at 6. For now, we're live in Spalding County. Griffin, Sophia Choi, Channel 2 Action News.
More details. Investigators found Timothy Coggins' body along Minter Road in Spalding County in 1983. Spalding County Sheriff Daryl Dix says Coggins died a horrible, torturous death. Family members told us it's unnerving to know the suspect still lived in their community.
The breakthroughs in the investigation came in waves, each one bringing them closer to the truth, closer to justice for Timothy. The first significant lead came when the investigators discovered that Timothy, a young black man, had been dating white women and was selling marijuana in white neighborhoods. This was a bold defiance of the societal norms of the time, a defiance that would have infuriated racists and Klan members. This lead was followed by the identification and subsequent arrests of two men, Frankie Gebhardt and William Moore Sr. The men were charged with murder, their names forever linked to one of the most horrifying hate crimes in Georgia's history. Gebhardt and Moore, who had lived in the shadows for over 3 decades, were now in the spotlight.
Well, that's right, Cheryl. We heard from several witnesses today. Some of them said they personally knew Frankie Gebhardt through friends or family. Others served time in jail alongside of them, but all of them told similar stories of Frankie Gebhardt at some point over the last decades, saying that he killed Coggins alongside Bill Moore Sr. Bill Moore Sr. is also charged with this murder and will be tried at a later date. Now, 2 of the witnesses that we heard from today, they served in jail alongside of Gebhardt. The defendant told them specifics about killing Coggins. Another man said a while back Gebhardt told him about the murder while outside of jail, and that witness talked with investigators last year while facing his own criminal charges and is now behind bars. All 3 men who are currently serving time said they have not received or been offered any reduced sentences for their testimony here today. And while Willard Sanders testified, he said he had known Gebhardt since the defendant was 6 years old. Sanders says after Coggins' body was found in 1983, Gebhardt later started talking unprovoked about how him and Moore put the body there after dragging him behind a vehicle.
He said Bill killed him and he tied a chain to his feet and drug him on the power line.
When the defendant told you this about what he and Bill Moore had done, were you surprised?
It kind of surprised me a little bit.
Okay. What'd you think about it?
I just thought to myself, why?
And one of the witnesses who testified this morning, he was serving in jail alongside Gebhardt, and that witness says that he has several white nationalist tattoos that are very visible. He said Gebhardt sat down next to him, and Gebhardt said that he was part of the KKK. The state numerous times has suggested that this was a racially motivated crime after Coggins was dating a white woman back in 1983.
Their faces synonymous with a heinous act of violence and racism. Their arrests shook the community, but it also brought a sense of relief. There was finally a glimmer of hope that justice would be served, that Timothy's death would not be in vain. The reopening of Timothy's case was not just about solving a murder. It was about confronting a dark chapter of history, about standing up against racism, about demanding justice for a life cut short by hate. Finally, after decades of waiting, the wheels of justice began to turn. In 2018, the courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. A collective breath was held as the years of anticipation, pain, and uncertainty culminated in this very moment. The accused, Frankie Gebhardt and William Moore Sr., stood tense, facing the consequences of a heinous crime committed over 3 decades ago. Gebhardt, a hardened figure, was found guilty of the brutal murder of Timothy Coggins. The jury's decision was clear and resounding, a reflection of the horror that had gripped the courtroom as the details of Timothy's death were laid bare. The sentence? Life in prison plus an additional 30 years. A fitting punishment for a crime so steeped in hatred and brutality. William Moore Sr., on the other hand, pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and concealing the death of another. His sentence was less severe, 20 years in prison. But the stain of guilt, the weight of his actions, would surely haunt him for the rest of his days. As the hammer fell and the sentences were declared, a wave of relief washed over the courtroom. Timothy's family, who had waited for 35 long years for this moment, found some closure.
I'm sorry?
Your name?
Heather Coggins. I'm Timothy's oldest niece. And we have here today, we have 4 of Timothy's siblings. We have his sister, his oldest sisters, and his brother.
Your reaction to the verdict?
I'm so elated with joy. I can't even describe it in words. We've waited for 34 years to even be here today. We never thought that we would be here. We thought Tim had been forgotten. My grandparents went to their grave with this murder being unsolved, the uncertainty of this murder being solved. They went to their grave with it. So I never thought that we would be here today, and to get a guilty verdict, we are elated. I don't know the words.
To relive this in court day by day, hearing this testimony and sitting with the man who was accused of killing him, what was that like for you?
It was extremely painful for all of us. We didn't know the details surrounding our Uncle Tim's murder. To sit here in court and to go back to that night, go back to the people that saw him last, go back to have with our imagination to his last words, go back to the things that they did to him, how they, how he. It was crazy to even visualize what he went through. It was crazy to hear the details, and it's hard not to go there with him. It's hard to not be there with him in that dirt road crying. And I know he cried out. I know he wanted someone to help him, and no one was there to help him.
30-some years later, what do you say to the people who finally came forward and made this right for your family?
Whatever it took for you to come 34 years later, we appreciate you. We could have had this justice 34 years ago. We could have been here 34 years ago. My Uncle Tim's death left an impact on our family, an everlasting impact on our family, and our family never repaired from that. So at this point, now we can move on. Now we can live in peace. Tim can rest in peace. My grandparents can rest in peace. Now we can live in peace. We don't have to tell anyone else this story that Tim was from a small town where no one cared. Where no one cared and no one was brought to justice for his murder. It wasn't just a murder, it was a brutal, heinous killing. And now we don't have to tell our kids or our grandkids anymore that no one cared for your Uncle Tim. Now we have someone who's guilty and who will spend the rest of their life in prison and to serve time for this murder that he committed.
Heather, you talked about going to the gravesite of Tim and your grandparents.
Yes.
What will that be like
We're going to go to Tim's grave. We did a memorial for Tim back in December 2017, and we're going to go to my grandmother's grave, and we can now tell them, hey, someone did care. Someone did finally come forward. Someone cared enough to even take this case to trial, because that didn't happen 34 years ago. We all know the investigation was a shabby investigation. We all know that. We all heard that in court. We know that the people here today, the Sheriff's Department here today, the GBI department here today, is not the department that was here in 1983 when Tim was brutally murdered. We know that this is a different department today, and we are forever thankful and forever grateful that that's what we're here, that we're standing here with this department where they thought enough of not only Tim, but the community and justice to bring this to justice.
Do you have any reaction? Do you have any reaction? A lot of the witnesses in this case we heard in the courtroom that they're criminals, that they did terrible things, they're just looking for a deal, but they kept speaking, and that was the case here.
The truth will always be the truth, regardless of who tells the truth. If you are a criminal, you hang with criminals.
The gaping wound of uncertainty finally began to heal. Justice, delayed though it was, had been served. Yet, the story of Timothy Coggins was not just about a horrific crime. It was about the resilience of a community and a family that refused to let the memory of their loved one be forgotten. It was about a society that continued to fight for justice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The impact of this case reached far beyond the borders of Sunnyside, Georgia. It echoed across the nation, a chilling reminder of the depths of racial hatred. It served as a stark reflection of our past and a call to action to ensure a more equitable future. The memory of Timothy Coggins, his untimely death, and the justice that was finally served will forever be etched in the annals of Sunnyside, Georgia. His story, a testament to the enduring human spirit, will continue to inspire the fight against racial hatred and injustice.
Klansmen for Mississippi!
Mississippi!
Klansmen for America!
For America!
Klansmen, behold the fiery cross, still brilliant. All the troubled history failed to quench its hallowed flame. Let me say that the cross is an inspiration, a sign of the Christian religion, a symbol of faith, hope, and love. We do not burn but light the cross to signify that Christ is the light of the world.
On this night, you can only hope the pastor's right.